Welcome, everyone, to the No Streetlights podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Tim. We'll be diving deeply into what we've been through, how it changed us, and what we've learned.
We want to crush stigmas through exploration and raw, honest discussions. Let's come together and break through these social norms by being vulnerable and open with each other. So take a breath, relax, and be welcome.
And a huge thank you to @HighlandMarkle for the original music, as well as all the pre- and post-production assistance.
We couldn't have done it without you, brother. Thank you. We couldn't have done it without you, brother. Thanks.
Couldn't have done it without you, brother. Shank you.
A huge thank you to Highland Markle for the original music, as well as all the pre- and post-production assistance. You can find him on Instagram at Highland Markle for all your mastering and mixing needs.
He also plays the music and the other music. He's really good at it.
Man, I wish we were still in the honeymoon phase.
Yeah. I still am.
All right. So what are we talking about today, Tim?
We're going to talk a little bit about military leadership.
We're still in the neighborhood of July 4th, so with independence on our mind, we're going to talk a little bit about our military experience and the leadership theories that we have developed thanks to our experience.
I've experienced good leaders, bad leaders, pretty middle of the road leaders. And not just in the military, but in life in general. Even outside working the jobs I had before I joined, I experienced what it was like having a manager that took care of his people, trained his people, laid out the expectations, and provided all the resources and tools that I needed in order to actually learn how to do the job better. And then I've also had leaders, managers, again, in the military and outside of the military, where their approach to leading people was hands-off and very indirect.
Yeah, I think that's an important point that everyone knows, but a lot of people don't think about, is having a micromanager may be awful, but having someone who provides zero guidance is oftentimes just as harmful.
Being a person who has been a manager out of the military and a LPO in the military, I completely agree. You have to provide that guidance.
So for our non-military listeners, what's an LPO?
An LPO stands for leading petty officer. Typically, they are the person who is overall in charge of a section, division.
Yeah. So that really equates to a manager on the outside, because what we would see as like a watch commander would be like a shift lead.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've got to say, even starting with my first two leaders in the military after I'd, gotten out of all of our initial trainings, were really two fantastic studies in leadership. The first watch commander I had was a yes man. He just wanted to make everyone happy. He was a people pleaser. So anytime someone over him called and told him that they thought we should be doing X, Y, or Z, he would immediately call out over the radio and interrupt our day and our work for all of us to get into like a different uniform. Or if we were on the gate together and you didn't say, "Good morning, chief," first thing when like the operations chief rolled through, he would call out over the radio when the chief called and complained and be like, "Hey, everyone, make sure if anyone's in your chain of command, you're addressing them properly," offering a post brief, things of that nature. Whereas my second leader would straight up tell people, like, "This is my shift. I'm going to run it the way I want. I don't care if it's raining lightly and one of my guys doesn't have a jacket on. They're a grown adult. They can suffer the consequences of not having their rain jacket, or maybe they don't mind getting misted on because it's 80 degrees and 80% humidity in the Mediterranean."
Dude, the amount of times that I've had somebody in the upper echelon of our chain of command attempt to dictate how us in operations would do our day-to-day job, or not even necessarily the day-to-day job, but like the minute details of the things that were going on right there in that moment, such as what you said, the weather gear. You know, in Virginia, it can get boiling hot, especially if you're standing up on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier that just seems to absorb heat and retain it like it is an oven. You're standing up there and it starts raining and you're kind of enjoying the misting, like you said, or the little droplets of water that are slowly cooling you off. And it'll be like some random person, some random like chief or officer who sees a sentry standing outside in the rain with no kind of gear on, and they're immediately calling down to your security officer or your operations LCPO or your senior enlisted leader, and they're immediately saying, hey, why are your sentries, your personnel, just out here with no gear on? And the thing about that is it's never necessarily a negative thing when the officer or the other person calls. They do have that level of concern, which is fine. The issue comes along whenever people start enforcing you and telling you, hey, you have to do this because I told you to. You're going to put on your rain gear, you're going to put on your poncho, whatever it may be, just because I deem that you need it. But we're all adults. We all raised our right hand. We all said our oath of enlistment. And as far as the government's concerned, we were adult enough to make that decision. So how about the individuals let us be adult enough to make the call on whether we want to wear our cold weather gear or our rain gear or our ponchos or whatever it may be, whatever they provide us that we can utilize. We know it's there. We have brains that think we can use them. And if you don't want to use them, that is 100% your call.
Yeah. A lot of people find it much easier to turn their brain off while in the military. And I mean, it's a pretty solid survival tactic, but I think we should be having the discussions of, just because Tim's wearing gloves because his hands are cold, and I'm wearing a toboggan or beanie, depending on where you're from, because I'm bald and my ears are cold. I don't think that my boss's boss should get yelled at. I think that they can have the conversation with me and say, hey, why aren't you two uniform at the gate? And we'll say, well, Aaron's bald, so he's wearing a toboggan because his ears are cold. And Tim is, doing more things with his hands because he's the contact sentry. So his hands are getting cold, so he put on his gloves.
I have thick, coarse Italian hair, so, my head is perfectly warm, but these delicate, dough-rolling hands of mine need gloves. It's just that simple.
Yeah, you've been a pencil pusher for a minute. When's the last time you dug a ditch?
Your wedding.
Okay, yeah, that's it. Everyone at my wedding worked a lot. Yeah, man. But, over the course of our careers, going through what we did, I was able to develop a pretty fleshed out leadership doctrine that I call collaborative leadership. And I think one of the key points of my leadership theory is that I've never had anyone work for me. I work with everyone. So the most junior sailor to the most crusty, salty dog, they all get to voice their opinion. I'm willing to hear their feedback and consider something I hadn't considered before. And a big part of the Navy core value commitment is demanding respect up and down the chain, which means if my supervisor comes to me and says, hey, call your guys and tell them to put on their rain jackets, I should be able to say, excuse me, Chief, my people are grown adults. If they didn't bring their rain jackets, they're going to get wet. If they did bring their rain jackets and they don't want to wear it, they're allowed to do that. And if they get sick or cold or whatever, we'll deal with that. But
Yeah.
I'm going to let my people make that decision because, as you and I have talked a couple times, there's the golden rule, which is treat people as you would want to be treated. But then there's the platinum rule, which is treat people the way they want to be treated. So, as a very outspoken extrovert here, if I encounter someone, I might want them to engage me in conversation. Whereas you, as a more introverted person or leader, you might just want someone to be like, Mr. Brunicardi, and let you keep doing what you were doing. So that's a very important thing that a lot of old school leaders don't consider is, what is that person going through? Is that sentry who's on gate without his cold weather gear? Is he from Wisconsin? Is this nice weather to him or them?
I want to go back to what you talked about with the platinum rule. So there was an article published by the Harvard Business Review that actually outlined possible limitations to the golden rule. And I'm going to try and quote this as quickly as possible because I don't want to just sit here and read off of a paper, but the idea of treating others as you would like to be treated, it can be very limited in the sense that there are unselfish people who earnestly wish to satisfy the needs of their fellows, but were inept because it never occurred to them that others had tastes or emotional requirements different from their own.
Okay, so it's basically saying other people want different things than what you want.
Yeah. They kind of discuss how the idea, treat others the way you would like to be treated, you as a person, if you don't exhibit a certain level of empathy, then you're not going to understand that certain people want to be treated in a different light than how you're treated. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're okay with a certain type of treatment or a certain type of conversation or a certain type of tone that people will take with you. But if you can't understand that not everybody is like that, then as a leader executing the golden rule, you're going to fall short. You're not going to be able to be an effective leader for those people because you cannot understand emotionally and mentally what they need.
So while you were pulling up that, I pulled up The Dark Side of Leadership, which is an article by Rafael Magana and Yajira de la Paz. Excuse me if I'm saying that wrong. I'm certainly not a linguist. I do enjoy language, but not the best. But I think knowing what qualities to avoid is something that we're getting a lot better at because you learn so much more from a negative experience. Those stick out more in our mind. So we're understanding that, as these two professionals stated, arrogance is going to be a very toxic leadership quality if they're lacking empathy, if they're not able to take criticism and feedback from everyone in the organization, if they're impatient or intolerant, those are going to be obstacles to having a team that works together. So I think we're really working at, instead of being arrogant, we're trying to be humble so that we can take feedback. And that's a lesson I've learned from positive leaders exhibiting it and negative leaders being arrogant.
I find the term toxic leader very interesting. I wasn't super familiar with what a toxic leader was until a little bit later into my military career. I kind of assumed that everybody over me, especially when I was a lower pay grade, either had my best interest in mind at all times or at least considered how everybody felt around them to a certain degree. It took me a little while to start understanding that there were people in the military who was more interested in advancing their career and advancing who they were and their image to other people rather than the people who actually worked for them. So I did kind of I had to wade through what it was to work for a toxic leader and also being a toxic leader. Now, when I originally had started gaining rank in the military, I gained rank very quickly, and I felt as if I was on almost a roller coaster of responsibilities, duties, and what I needed to do for the people around me. I picked up E5, Petty Officer Second Class in the Navy, very quickly, a little bit shy of 2 years of my time frame in. And as soon as I put on that pay grade, I immediately hit the ground running. I wanted to take on different programs. I wanted to be in charge of not just a couple people anymore, but I was looking to grab as many sailors that I could claim to be my subordinates as possible. Now, that's not a bad thing. I was very ambitious and I was goal-oriented, which is fine. You should be goal-oriented in life and whatever it is that you're doing. However, the way I handled the extra workload and the stress was not the best. I definitely used more of a tyrannical approach whenever it came to handling situations where a sailor had made a mistake, or they had forgotten to do something, or they failed to do something properly. Instead of talking them through it and kind of assessing how we should handle the problem and then solve it together, I spent more time yelling at sailors in what I thought was the appropriate way to correct the deficiencies. But since I have changed my mindset and changed my outlook on how to approach sailors who have either misunderstood their orders or have simply not been able to accomplish the job that they were given, I have realized that how I used to talk to people and how I used to portray myself as a quote-unquote leader was wrong. I should not have been doing it that way. And the way that I would approach things now would definitely take on more closer to your platinum rule and your collaborative leadership doctrine.
Yeah.
The idea that I had when I was a junior sailor, thinking that my leaders were looking out for me, and then finding out that some of them weren't. How do I take that and make sure I let the sailors know that I am looking out for them and that my best interest and my personal goal is to make sure that they succeed? Because if they succeed, they're bringing all of us up with them.
Yep. So in my experience in the military, there were two people who were picking up rank. It's people who are bringing their team up with them and people who are climbing over their peers. And those who are climbing over their peers typically don't last very long, because you can't get anywhere in any organization without a team. One person can only do so much. If you're not motivating your team to get to the finish line, you're essentially running a race with anchors. You want those around you to be acting, excuse all the naval metaphors, but like propellers. You want to be driving in the same direction.
For a guy who's never been on a ship, you sure are talking a lot about ship stuff.
Yeah, I don't like boats, but I like philosophy, and ships somehow convey that really well.
Something about a well-placed metaphor is just the chef's kiss. Mwah.
Yeah. Thanks. I was known in boot camp for being very long-winded, so hopefully some of those cats are looking at us now. Man, this mug is now just talking, and that's his...
That's all he does? He just talks all the time? That's exactly what we thought he would be doing.
Yeah.
I was definitely known in boot camp of being a toxic leader. I guess 22-year-old me was so excited to get just a little taste of power that I was willing to just do whatever I needed to.
Yeah.
But that's just another way that I've grown out of that mindset. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't have toxic traits and lead people in a aggressive and arrogant manner, I would say.
At least unfriendly.
Unfriendly, yeah.
So my big thing in reference to the article I mentioned earlier was I was very intolerant. So you and I were raised that even if we lose everything, we still have our name and our word. So everything you do, you should put your best effort because that's how your reputation gets built. So whenever I started, my career overseas, I saw these sailors around me not putting in their best effort. And I was intolerant of that because I didn't realize that they were going through just as much as me, if not more, or they weren't as well prepared to go through the trenches because it was their first time or whatever. And so when someone messed up, I took that as almost a personal insult. Like, why are you giving me crap effort instead of being at 100% capacity and working your tail off every day? And now looking back, I realize that's because people aren't used to the same stress load that you or I am used to. So whenever they would have stuff going on at home, it would impact their work because they weren't accustomed to that. And so they were very concerned about their parents' health, or, one of their siblings was starting down a bad path or fell in with a bad crowd. And so I found a lot more success when I started asking people what's wrong and then listening to the response instead of asking people what's wrong and then telling them what was wrong with them.
To me, it sounds like both you and I had the same issue. Whenever we first started off as leaders in the military, we would talk at people rather than talk to people.
Yeah.
Me personally, my listening skills were not nearly as toned then as they are now. I would hear what people would say, but I would register very little. Like, oh, you're talking to me about how you barely got any sleep last night. How does that affect you completing the mission right now? All I'm hearing are excuses.
Yeah.
Again, that was how I used to be. That was how I addressed people. And to me, it kind of sounds like you and I had the same mindset. It was, give me 100% every single time that I tell you to. If I say jump, you do it. No questions asked. And if we have to talk about it later, we won't.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely expected people to be working their tail off. And then by the time I got to Poland, I had so much leadership experience that I was telling them, just earn your paycheck. Just do the bare minimum. I don't like getting yelled at. And if I get yelled at, I'm going to yell at the person who caused me to get yelled at. So if you don't want yelled at, do the bare minimum. Know your post orders. Check the IDs. Keep your logbook updated. And nobody can yell at you because you're doing everything that you have to be doing. And if you're doing that, we're good. We are so good.
Obviously lacking the context of, how you were transitioning to how you were in Poland. All I imagine is just you going into work in the early days, yelling at people so much, and then you are constantly getting yelled at in return. So by the time you make it to Poland, it's like you've been ran through the washer and dryer 1,500 times, and you're just like, come on, guys, please, for the love of God.
I've seen several spin cycles, so I'll say that.
You got to go through the ringer every now and then, You have to fail as a leader in order to learn how to be a better leader. What worked and what didn't work. And it sounds like, again, this happened to me, so I assume it happened to you. But it sounds like we failed a lot.
Yeah, unfortunately I failed a lot of sailors. But thanks to that, I did better in the future.
Now, there were a couple times that I have experienced great leadership.
Yeah.
I said this at the beginning of the podcast, but you can have great leadership in and out of the military, regardless of what kind of leader you have, whether it's your shift manager, your division officer, or your region manager, CEO. It applies across the board. You can have a good leader and a bad leader. Some traits that I have pulled up over here, it's an article on betterup.com written by Shona Waters, PhD. They outline 8 toxic leadership traits. So we have frequent lying or inconsistent expectations, doesn't listen to feedback, arrogance, which I mentioned earlier, places importance on hierarchy, discriminates against employees, lack confidence, incompetent at their job, and self-interested. The self-interested one is the one that I think kind of stands out because that is what I've seen the most out of any of the toxic leaders that I have. You know, they are the ones thinking, how can I prop everything up to make it look like I am the absolute best when it comes to my peers? But what the people don't see behind the scenes is that very same leader was also like, you're going to be standing 12 hours on post, on the flight deck, in the sun, and you're going to be studying the entire time. And if you fail your patrolman board or get anything less than 100%, you are going to continue doing that job where you are going to be standing for 12 hours in the sun. You don't want to do that? You better study.
Yeah, you can definitely drive your people too hard. We all only have so much capacity to deal with things. And if you're using 80% of your capacity to deal with home life, work's not going to get that much because there's not a lot left. So you need to make sure your people are healthy and safe in order to get their best effort, which, I mean, a lot of studies have shown that shorter work days lead to happier workers, which leads to higher retention. So my most recent management role, I had 2 of my employees would often come in 5-10 minutes late every single day. And I had to take a step back and look at it and say, well, these 2 people are single mothers. They have to drop their kids off at daycare. One had a medical condition I won't disclose, but it often led to them being a little tardy. And instead of seeing that as a personal insult because I woke up at 4:30 and had a pot of coffee and came in early and opened up shop, that was my job as the manager, was to come in, open everything, get everything ready for my crew. And then if they were 5 or 10 minutes late, as long as it's not affecting production, which we normally wouldn't get busy until an hour or 2 hours after we opened up doors. So when someone would complain, hey, Tim's been late every day, I'm like, okay, well, that's a me and Tim problem. And if you don't like how I'm handling it, of course you can talk to me about it. I can explain why I'm giving Tim leeway. And oftentimes, Tim would come in late and then not take lunch. So they're still putting in their hours. I'm just being a reasonable human and realizing that they're doing their best. And I had another employee who wasn't doing their best, and I made sure that they knew that I saw that as well. So, as I kind of stated earlier, if you're doing what you need to be doing, you're untouchable. So, my advice to everyone would be, make sure you're doing the bare minimum. And if you're not being compensated enough to be doing what their bare minimum is, let them know what they need to be paying you for you to be doing that bare minimum.
Outside of pay negotiations, because you can't exactly negotiate your pay in the military, I do think the most important thing to do if you do have a leader who is falling short of your expectations of what a leader should be is to have that conversation. If you need a third-party person to sit in on that conversation so that you can effectively get out your thoughts and your feelings and your information to this leader who is falling short and you have that other person who's in there to back you up, you're going to feel so much more confident. And who knows, I'm not going to say that every single person is susceptible to the conversation that will force them to change their ways. But sometimes people don't know what they're doing. Having that conversation, sitting down, outlining what somebody is doing wrong, how they're falling short as a leader, that's going to be the easiest and hopefully direct way to fix that problem.
Yeah. So one of the leaders I had that was junior to me by rank that I'm most grateful for, because you're serving with them now.
Yep.
We'll call this sailor Smith.
Okay.
And anytime Smith would go somewhere where I knew somebody, I would call the person I knew and say, hey, this person named Smith is coming to you. You need to trust this person, because whenever I became a toxic leader in Japan, they called me and said, hey, I'm probably going to get in trouble, but you're being a jerk. You need to fix your stuff because no one wants to work for you. Everyone's miserable that's working for you. And here's why. And they expected me to yell at them or jump down their throat. But luckily, I've had amazing, humble people around me who are willing to tell me what I'm doing wrong, or if I'm telling them what they're doing wrong, they're willing to take that on board. So I was stressed out of my gourd because no one wanted to work for me, and I didn't know why. And this sailor sat me down. Well, that's a very polite way of putting it. They told me very directly that I was jacked up and how I needed to fix it. And so I did. And that day forward, man, my life became so much easier. And they don't think much of that story, but anytime they go someplace where I have one of my boys, like you, I called you and I was like, hey, this sailor's coming over. You need to take this person into your confidence, because they told me when I was jacked up.
Yeah, I remember whenever you did call me and let me know about that sailor coming. And now that sailor and I are pretty good friends. I definitely consider them one of my close friends out here.
Good.
And they are a very good person.
Oh, yeah. Everyone loved Smith. And so I was like, okay, what is Smith doing that I'm not? And then they called and told me. So thank you for that.
I wonder if they know who they are. I feel like they probably know who they are.
I'm sure. I've done this to them 2 or 3 times where they're about to PCS and they tell me where they're going, and I call like 3 people. And I'm like, yo, look out for this person because they're a real one.
They're legit. Absolutely legit.
Yeah. I want to share this quote. It's not exactly the one I'm looking for, but it's very close. So this quote has helped me a lot, and it is, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from poor judgment. So, I've said that I was a martial artist or a fighter or whatever. I learned so much more from getting my butt kicked than I did from any fight I ever won. And so I think it's important to kind of translate that into life in general. When you're getting your butt kicked, that means you're doing something wrong. And if you don't like getting your butt kicked, you should probably change. And if you don't know what to change, reach out to someone who looks a little less beat up. Or maybe someone who looks a little more beat up because they've got more experience taking punches.
Make sure their scars have healed, though. If they got recent ones, then they're probably still getting beat up, too.
But you can watch them, and you can learn how to dip, dive, duck, dodge, dive.
The 5 Ds of leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I might have passed with a C.
Passed with a C.
Leadership school.
So I want to talk a little bit more about your leadership doctrine, what you've cultivated as a leader, and how you implemented it in your day-to-day.
Okay. So you just want me to go a little more in depth on that?
Give me the basic outline, the basic structure, and I can talk to you a little bit about the things that I've developed and where I've taken my leadership style.
Yeah. There was another for you. Eat that up, Tim.
I'll leave that one in.
Nom, 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 nom.
I'm going to leave that in.
Yeah. So, quick summary. No one works for you. Everyone works with you. Everyone has a voice. Everyone can be heard. And a huge part of being a successful leader is knowing your strengths and weaknesses and your team's strengths and weaknesses. So, knowing that you are very detail-oriented, as a watch commander, I might come to you and say, hey, Bruno, I know that you love making Excel spreadsheets. You're not very good at it, but you love tracking people's post hours. So I'm going to give you the watch bill because I need it to be fair and balanced, and I know you're going to give that to me.
I would decline that job so fast.
Yeah, I mean, we've done it a couple times, so we know. We know better. So actual sailors know that Navy stands for never again volunteer yourself. But luckily, Damon taught me a very long time ago that you don't tell people you have another job for them. You tell them you've got an opportunity. So I would say, hey, Bruno, I've got an opportunity for you to shine.
Oh, wow. I am putting that one in my toolbox. I will be using that.
I would say, hey, Smith is jacking up the watch bills. I know you've been on main gate 6 days in a row and you're getting tired of it. I need you to take this watch bill and turn it into a freaking Picasso. I need everyone to be balanced on their posts. I need to know who's ready for their patrol exams. Can you do that for me? And that was me putting trust in you. And that would motivate you to reward that trust. Say, wow, this person cares about me and they see me. I need to show out. So that's a big part of collaborative leadership is we need to work together to get where we're going. And a lot of that is, having very obvious expectations that you have presented to your team, and then you provide feedback. So I hated whenever our evaluations were coming up and I would sit down with somebody and they would say, hey, you've been doing this wrong for 6 months. It's like, what? Why would you tell me now? You should have told me 5 months ago after you saw me messing it up steadily. So I would say, I expect you to do the bare minimum, and I will tell you immediately if that requirement is not being met. And another one of these 8 toxic leadership traits from that study you were citing earlier, it says, one of the huge ones is placing an importance on hierarchy, which we see a lot in the military is this person's an E6, therefore they're in charge of this E5, therefore they're in charge of this E4. But if you recognize every single person's talents, you might have someone junior over someone who's senior because they're more adept at whatever needs done. So luckily, I was taught a lot about suppressing my ego as I grew up and as I came into the military and took on leadership roles. So if the most junior person is coming to me saying, hey, this problem that we're all facing, this is a potential solution, I had to be open to them having the solution.
Over the years, you and I have talked a lot about how we approach different situations, what we would do. You were in charge of training at some point throughout your career, and
Yep.
You had your fingers in all kinds of different instructions and manuals, and you kind of had a grasp on certain things that I would need help on, and I would call you and we would talk about it a lot. And, over the years, all the information you fed to me, it's helped me in those situations. Some of them have stuck with me a little bit, some of them have not. But one thing that you have told me repeatedly, and I've always kept it close to my heart, was the way you look at sailors is you acknowledge that no matter their rank or age, you acknowledge that that person is going to be better than you at something, and you want to make it your job to find out what that something is.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me. That's something that I have wanted to imitate. I wanted to implement that. I don't want to have sailors work for me and then do a job that, one, they aren't very good at, two, they're being forced to do, and three, miss out on doing a job that they would be amazing at. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want my sailors to go through that. Because it's very important to understand your people. And you've incorporated that into your collaborative leadership doctrine. That's your mission, is to understand your people and employ them to the best of their ability.
Yep. I loved having the crazy guy no one wanted to stand watch with at my main gate, because when I stood gate with him and I would say, hey, if we were attacked right now, what would be the most efficient way to attack us? And so he would think about it for a second and say, well, if I were going to take the base, here's how I would do it. And I would say, okay, well, now, how do you prevent that? And I would see him for the rest of the shift working his tail off to be situationally aware. Keep an eye out. Hey, maybe I need to break out the binos once in a while and scan the tree line. So, just because somebody is socially awkward, that doesn't mean they're not going to be a great addition to your team. I love people with really unique points of view because they're going to bring solutions that you've never considered. And that's super important because if you have 80 people who think the same way, you're going to have one solution. Whereas if you have 40 people thinking, in radically different ways, you're going to get 40 ways to solve a problem. And I loved having lazy sailors because they're going to find the easiest way to accomplish the mission. And if I can make my team's life easier, I'm going to do that.
That's such an abstract way to look at that situation, and definitely not one that is utilized by many people I've met. I always love hearing stories like that because then I start thinking to myself, how can I become more abstract in my thinking as a leader, as a peer, as a follower, whatever it may be? That's something that I kind of need to challenge myself to do, because a lot of the times I do get stuck on one track. I have my blinders on and I see only the end goal of whatever it is. Sometimes those blinders do stop me from remembering to have an out-of-the-box thinking style.
Yeah.
And one of the big differences between you and I as leaders in the military, you've served longer than I have. You had about 2 years longer than me, right?
Yeah, but now I've been out for about 2 years, so...
Yeah.
We're coming up on even, Tim.
We're getting pretty close. But you put on E6 and held that position for a lot longer than I have.
That's a fair statement.
You've had more experience to the degree of leadership required at that rank.
That's fair. I did, run the training department in Poland, and every step of my career, I've been in the most senior leadership role I could be for my rank. And I am a lot more extroverted, so I go out of my way to talk to people and get feedback, and I would say it's a lot easier for me to interact with people than it might be for you. Feel free to disagree, but I love talking to people and finding out what makes them tick and what's going on and all of that. Whereas I've noticed you do enjoy your space and your peace, and hey, here's the mission, here's what we got going on. See me if you need me. Otherwise, let's do our shit.
Your experience, that's allowed you to develop your collaborative leadership doctrine and not only refine it, but implement it.
Yeah.
So you've had the opportunity to sit there and see, this works from my idea, this doesn't work from my idea. How can I tweak this? How can I fix this? What do I need to do to make it better? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I haven't had that experience yet. I am brand new to the world of being an E6, and I haven't had the opportunities to implement and refine any of my leadership techniques.
What is your leadership doctrine?
A lot of what you said bleeds over into what I view as how I should be as a leader. Some of my biggest things are always treat people as people. They are going to understand that you care, which as a leader, you should. You should absolutely care. My next big thing is to establish upfront the expectations. Lay out exactly how I want things to be taken care of. And then last but not least, you need to enforce those expectations. Once everybody has grasped what the job or the mission is, we have to execute it. So if it fails, you need to enforce those expectations. Hey, how come this didn't happen the way that we had discussed it was going to happen? Where was the shortcomings? Always give the people the ability to explain what happened, because unexpected things can occur. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
If the unexpected happens, we go back to the drawing board and hit it again. And anytime anything pops up, we'll always take care of it. But if you fail to enforce the expectations, if something fails because somebody just simply didn't follow through with what their job was at the time, then you have to go in and do the disciplining, inform the individual of what happened, how they failed the expectation, what can we do as leaders and they do as the sailor in order to prevent that from happening again.
So it sounds like the core of your theory is starting from an empathetic place and staying humble enough to be able to accept feedback at any juncture during your decision-making process.
Yes.
Okay. And then it seems like the two actions that you are taking as a leader is one, setting the expectation or training your people to how you expect the job to be done, and then providing feedback to either say, hey, you're doing great. Is there anything that we can do to improve this for you? Or, hey, you're kind of falling short in this area. I need your paperwork turned in 30 minutes sooner so that I can have everything to my boss, at close of shift.
Yes.
And one thing I wanted to touch on that you brought up that I think is here in the Better Up article about the toxic leadership traits is inconsistent expectations. And one thing I think we can agree on is inconsistency looks like favoritism. If you don't have to have your paperwork turned in 30 minutes before the end of shift and I do, I'm going to be looking a little sideways at you.
Yeah, I'd definitely be wondering what's the difference between that person and me.
Yeah, so I think that's a key takeaway from what you were saying.
If you are evaluating every situation on a case-by-case basis and handling it to the absolute best that you can, it's going to be hard to call favoritism. Now, again, when it comes to toxic leadership and inconsistency, if you are inconsistent on a consistent basis, you are a toxic leader.
I like that. I think that's very important that being kind isn't the same as being nice. Luckily, I've had several people throughout my life who have been willing to confront me when I'm not performing the way I need to be. Doc, for example, after a 5K once, I was like, oh, I think I'm going to call off work because, I ache and stuff. And Doc was like, I'm a middle-aged woman and you're a young, healthy man and you're calling off work because we ran a 5K yesterday? What the F is wrong with you? And I was like, that's good.
That's very fair. Thank you.
Yeah. Perspective's important.
Respect, yes.
Rule 0. Treat people with kindness or be a little empathetic, maybe.
Be a little empathetic.
Tune in next week for lesson 2.
We've definitely experienced good leaders and toxic leaders during our lifetime. How did you deal with your toxic leaders? How did you overcome that situation?
I believe wholeheartedly in doing my best because that's how I was raised. And so if someone isn't recognizing that, then they're going to get what they pay for. You know, I'm going to be just earning my check and going home. And that's kind of a survival tactic. But if you need to survive, dude, do what you got to do to survive. If you're not being rewarded for your efforts, you know, you can slow down, you can take a breath. And if you and I are working on a team together and I've got stuff going on, I just need to communicate that to you. So when I've had a toxic leader, luckily we were taught the informal resolution system, which is handling things at the lowest possible level. And having been a fighter, what are they going to do? Beat me up? Like, I've been beat up before. It's not that bad. So I'm not afraid to go to someone who's allowed to yell at me and say, hey, Tim, I think you're messing up. Here's how I think you're messing up, and here's how I think we fix it. Because something that I've heard 100,000 times is you can't focus on the problem. You have to focus on the solution. So if I'm bringing something up to you that's a problem, I'm telling you how to fix it. And if you bring me a problem, I'm going to say, okay, that's great. We can commiserate whenever, but how do we fix this? So I think the easiest way to handle a toxic leader is to first go to them and say, hey, I'm not really happy with how you're treating us. I'm not really happy with how you're talking to such and such. Here are my expectations. And if you fail to meet them, I will talk to you again. And should that fail, I will talk to your leader, or I'll call the general manager, or I'll talk to HR. And so another huge tenet of both our leadership theories is leadership at every level. If the person over you is messing up, you need to take charge and tell them that they're messing up. But more importantly, how to fix it.
Yeah. Communication can solve a lot of issues.
I can say with 100% certainty that the reason my marriage has been so successful is because our communication is A1. So, you know, all of my relationships, I try and employ the same level of communication where I'm saying, here are my needs. Here's how I expect you to meet my needs. And if you don't, we need to figure something else out.
Expectations and outlining what they are and how to fulfill them is something that you can implement in every facet of your life. Friendships, marriages,
Agreed.
Relationships, leadership. It all boils down to that communication. That is where you are going to solve probably a good 75 to 90% of your issues. Communicate.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a huge problem I had with my last full-time position. Is one of my people, I would go to them regularly and say, hey, what's wrong? You're being very hostile or whatever. And they would say, why would I be upset? I was like, I don't know what's going on. We could translate kind of the core tenet we talked about earlier with the Navy core value of commitment as bravery. You've got to set boundaries. You've got to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with how you're talking to me. I'm not comfortable with how you're standing your post, and here's why. Here's what I expect, and here's how we're going to fix it. And if not, well, we'll have to talk about that later.
I had somebody that I was in charge of, and they were an incredibly hostile and overall relatively lazy individual whenever it came to work. But on the side, we had so many common interests. They were a person that I could talk to about those interests, but the moment work crept into the conversation, it was almost like an immediate shutdown. Yeah. And one moment that always sticks out in my mind was one day this person was in a foul mood. I'm not really sure what the issue was, or at least I wasn't at the time. And me just doing my job, what I was supposed to, I instructed them to get into their patrol unit and get out on the road and essentially go and enforce traffic laws. You know, the job that we get paid to do.
Go do your job.
Exactly. And I didn't say it in a mean way or anything like that. This was well after I've already started changing my tone and how I addressed people. I just simply said, hey, so-and-so, can you get out on the road and go and enforce traffic for the next 30 minutes or so? Their response was they threw both of their arms up in the air and they said, oh, F this, of course I'm going to F and do this, or something to that degree. And one, that reaction was very poor to begin with. But two, they did this in front of a customer that we had. I was taking this person's information and assisting them with whatever they were visiting us for. And this person just straight up did that in front of them. And for a moment, my old mentality, my ship mentality had come back and I turned red in the face. I could feel how flush I was because I was so angry. But luckily, I had changed my mentality and changed how I wanted to be as a leader and was able to push that to the side. The person stormed off and I expressed to the customer, hey, give me a few minutes. I'll be right back. In the meantime, can you just fill out this paper for me? I went outside and I confronted them, but not in a angry manner. I just simply told them, I do not disrespect you in any way, shape, or form. I have not called you out of your name. I have not said anything rude or mean to you at all. But your response was so aggressive. Why? I just straight up had to confront them because that kind of reaction was so uncalled for in that given situation. And maybe that's what that person needed. And, you know, that might have just been the catalyst for that person to start talking about what was going on. They were having a problem that day. Yeah. There was something going on behind the scenes from their home life. And I didn't know about it. How could I know about it, you know?
It's so easy to say, hey, I don't appreciate the way you're talking to me. This is a professional working environment, and I'm going to need you to respect it as such. If you have an issue, please pull me to the side and we can talk about it.
Whatever is going on, we can talk about it. If I'm giving you an unreasonable expectation, let us discuss that.
So what will help the most people, the largest amount, would be just taking a breath and look at the situation empathetically. Would you react that way if the only thing that happened is someone told you to go handle traffic? No, clearly there's something more going on. So you should care enough about your team as individuals to want to find out what's going on and take care of that person so that you can collectively get to the finish line.
It's not a race to the top. And if you are looking to succeed, you are going to succeed better if you have everybody around you supporting you the same way that you're supporting them.
Yeah, I don't care how good I am at my job. It's much easier for the job to get done if there's 12 of us working on it than if it's just me fighting 11 people on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been Aaron.
And Tim.
Be good to yourselves and each other. We love you.
Peace.